I love you, Cleveland, and I love you, Ohio. And a very pleasant welcome to this week's version of Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. I'm Bruce Drennan along with Ryan Smith, and great to have you aboard following the divisional weekend. We have plenty to cover when it comes to the pro football playoffs, as we will analyze what has just transpired. Look ahead, we'll have Mark Lawrence joining us to handicap the two big conference championships this coming Sunday, and look ahead to the Super Bowl as well. Update for you on the Browns. We'll cover it all, and like I say, it's great to have you aboard. Ryan, good day to you, and good to have you back here with me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to hear from you again, Bruce. I'd like to say congrats to Mark, because if you watched your show last week, you made some money because he went 4 for 4 in the divisional round.
Yeah, I noticed that, and it's funny because he was so confident, as you know, about Baltimore.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, his strongest, because he hates laying points.
Yeah, that's what you were saying.
Yeah, and so when he was willing so adamantly to lay points in that Baltimore game, I found it interesting. Also, I totally agreed with him on Kansas City until you dethrone the champions. And for my 2 cents worth, I really think that's the same case with Baltimore. As good as they are, and right now they appear to be the best team, especially with Frisco showing a little vulnerability. But we'll get to all of that. Before we do, I want to touch upon the Browns, if we may. Ryan, I know that Barry did his annual end-of-the-season press conference. Give us the latest on that before we get into the playoffs.
Yeah, he opened his press conference, I thought was a little interesting. Before he got to the questions, he wanted to let the media members know that the storyline that he was paying most attention to after the Browns were out of it was the Detroit Lions. And there's obviously a ton of parallels between our franchise and their franchise, even in terms of relative success, or I should say the lack thereof recently. And then he went on to say, basically, it seemed to me as though, without saying that it was an excuse, because you don't want to ever hear managers or anybody really use excuses. They get you nowhere. But he was very proud of his staff and his players and everybody in that building in Berea that made it through all these injuries in this very testing season. He didn't really talk much about, kind of refused to talk about contract situations with either the players or the coaches, but he did get across the point that him and nobody in Cleveland wants to see that carry in Pittsburgh be Nick Chubb's last with the team. So he said he's going to do everything in his power to get that extension done. No, that will make the Browns fans very happy, as they don't want to see Nick Chubb play anywhere else in the NFL.
Well, let me interrupt you. Was there some scuttlebutt on that? Now, I know that at the beginning of the season, Chubb had made a statement that he said, which I totally agree with, that running backs are underpaid in the NFL. And, goodness, it's the position that I think we can all agree is the most vulnerable to serious injury. And as far as lasting power as a player in the NFL, it's got to be the least.
Yeah, no issues there. Just a fact of that the injury was so gruesome. It was his second really gruesome injury, dating all the way back to his days at Georgia. And just the fact that this is his last year on the deal, he doesn't have anything guaranteed after this. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be his last year in Cleveland. People don't think that's what's going to happen. Andrew Berry clearly doesn't want that to happen. It's just not set in stone, his future here yet. So it has just a little bit of ominous, whatever you want to call, to it.
Well, speaking of injuries, I think the more concern of an injury is Watson.
Yeah.
That's a shoulder. That was a serious injury that ended his season.
Yeah, Bruce, nothing really mentioned about it in the presser except that, the typical coach talk of he's progressing well. But other than that, nothing, no updates for us on the Deshaun Watson track.
Well, again, as I touched upon last week after we were eliminated, I'm very concerned because this is all going to be upon Watson now. And that is going to be a reflection of Stefanski. Stefanski's fate is going to be determined by Watson, even though Haslam and Barry are the ones that were responsible for making this trade. I'm sure that they consulted Stefanski, who had to give his approval. But let's face it, if they, heaven forbid, have to fire Stefanski, if next year is a catastrophic, disappointing season, I don't think Barry's going to get fired, and certainly Haslam's not going to fire himself, is my point. But everything now is upon Watson because of what Flacco did when we picked him up. And I can do nothing but compliment Barry and the organization for having the foresight to grab Flacco when I'm amazed that no one else did prior to us getting him, and then accomplishing what he did. But the negative to that, if there is a negative, and I believe there is next season. Because if Watson does not at least equal what Flacco did, but optimistically speaking, and I don't think it's unrealistic, to exceed what Flacco did, if that doesn't occur, I mean, the pressure is really going to be on Stefanski, because then 3 years of the 5-year contract will have expired. And as I always say, the clock is ticking. If we don't get to the Super Bowl, let alone win it, and we don't even have to win it, in my opinion, just get to the Super Bowl. We're one of only 4 teams, along with Detroit, speaking of Detroit, that have never even been to the Super Bowl. But if we don't get there within this 5-year contract, because of all those draft picks we had to give up to get Watson, I think it'll set the Browns franchise back at least 5 years, and I mean at least.
Yeah, Bruce. And it goes back to the first question that Barry really had to answer in that presser was about Joe Flacco, and asked, "Do you want him back?" You know, that's the question everybody wants to know. And Barry, the smart man he is, said, "Listen, we would love to have Joe Flacco back. I can't answer that question right now. We don't know what the quarterback market and all that's going to look like. But Bruce, I would love to ask you, because I don't know your opinion on it yet. Do you think the Browns would be able to have both of them coexist in that locker room? Not even from a standpoint that it's Deshaun and Joe Flacco that you're worried about them clashing heads or something, because we know they're both professionals. But are you worried about the other guys in the locker room and the fans dealing with that?"
That's a great question. Now that Flacco has shown that he can still do the job, would he want to relinquish the first string position and become a backup again? I mean, he proved with us. But then again, when you think of the rigors of a 17-game regular season schedule, he's a smart guy. He's got to be realistic that, hey, you know, is my body going to be able to take the wear and the tear of a 17-game schedule? Maybe it is beneficial that I am the backup. And again, it brings me back to Watson's injury. Watson's shoulder. I mean, that's a serious injury. Is he going to be 100%? Or even if he is when we start the season, maybe just one knock on that shoulder and he could be on the injured list again. I don't know. But I think it'll also depend on how much interest Flacco draws from other organizations, considering what he accomplished with us this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. Nobody's quite sure how that quarterback market is going to pan out. If somebody needs a bridge quarterback, Joe Flacco is certainly an option there. But Bruce, couldn't you see a scenario where, let's say we do keep Joe Flacco in that backup role? Couldn't you picture a scenario where Deshaun Watson makes a bad play, throws a pick, and instantly Cleveland is, "Give me back Flacco." Flacco wouldn't have made that turnover. He could throw touchdowns. It just sounds like a headache to me waiting to happen.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable here in Cleveland. No question about it. I do believe that the salary cap is going to play a role in this too, because Flacco is going to want some nice money now that he proved he can still do it. So we shall see. But it's an interesting scenario. There's no question about it. You know, especially because this is Cleveland's third playoff appearance since coming back as an expansion franchise in 1999. And here's another question. And I am quite surprised with the coaching carousel that we are experiencing, certainly every year, but particularly this year, Belichick and Carroll and everybody. Is there any rumors back home? Of course, I'm coming your way again from Cape Coral, Florida, as you can see on Zoom. Is there any rumors about Jim Schwartz?
You know, Bruce, it's so funny because we go back, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, as we're kind of entering that last final stretch of the regular season. And we were sitting here shocked that Jim Schwartz wasn't getting calls or wasn't getting requested for interviews. And it seemed, how could teams not have seen what he did with this Cleveland defense this year and consider him? And still nothing there. So it really seems like Jim Schwartz is locked in at that defensive coordinator position for us Cleveland Browns next year. And I got to imagine the majority, if not everybody, is totally okay, if not stoked about it.
Yeah, as I mentioned last week, and I would reiterate, I do look upon this season as a success because, especially with Watson going down, Chubb going down, I've always been of the belief that a team that has not been to the playoffs in many years need to get their feet wet. In the case of our game against Houston, they're one of the other 4 teams that has never been to the Super Bowl. So somebody had to win, somebody had to lose. It didn't apply, but in the next game, obviously, even though Houston put forth a good effort in the first half, it caught up to them, and that theory prevailed, which makes them even more dangerous and lethal next year because they're in a weak division. So they could very well be a mainstay in that South for many years to come here in the AFC with Stroud and company. But I do believe that the Browns should be looking at, we should look at our team as having an accomplishing season. But now it's a matter of taking it to the next level. And that means not only getting to the Super Bowl or getting to the playoffs next year, but at least winning one game, whether we are divisional champions or once again a wild card, because let's face it, we happen to play in the toughest division in the NFL. But I think we have to win a wild card. And this again brings me back to Watson. Flacco got us to the playoffs when it looked like there was no chance of that once Watson went down. And then we get in and we fall well short against Houston. But now I think Watson has at least got to get us to the playoffs and win one game. And by the way, I didn't mention this last week because I did choose to take a positive approach and outlook for the Browns like I am now. I think the season should be looked upon as a success. But getting back to the game last week, I did not see Stefanski and company make adjustments like I thought they should have for that game. Stefanski, to me, approached that game the way he did during the regular season game against Houston. And obviously, this was a different Houston team. They were a lot better prepared for this postseason performance, and it showed. So I think Stefanski, it's fair to say, was out-coached in this one. But that doesn't mean to say that it diminishes my overall opinion that this season was a success. But again, to close this out on my end, Ryan, I look upon next year as really being a pressurized situation for the Browns. Anything less than a playoff appearance and then one victory, at least one victory. Again, that will be the 3rd year of Watson's 5-year contract. The clock is ticking.
I'm fairly confident in saying that for 99% of fans next year, that baseline level of expectation is not only, like you said, to make the playoffs, but to at least win that wild card round. And I think that's a very fair expectation. And where does that start, Bruce? Like you said, it all starts with Deshaun Watson. He's the key to opening that proverbial door to getting to that ceiling of teams we see that are in the playoffs every year, like Kansas City, like the Bengals, obviously not this year, but like the Bills. The key is to Deshaun Watson. And the Browns know that. That is why Alex Van Pelt is gone. We need to find our next offensive coordinator. Now, I don't think Kevin Stefanski is going to give up play calling. But we need to bring in somebody, and I think they know it, specifically for Deshaun Watson to unlock him and get him to play to take us to this next level. And you mentioned that contract there at the end, Bruce. They know the clock is ticking faster than ever. And yes, you might have 2 more years left on that deal, but if you don't do it this year, that last year, to me, I don't really think it necessarily matters.
Well, a few points. The possibility of re-injuring himself with Watson brings us back to the question you had to me about Flacco. I mean, if they don't re-sign Flacco, or if they determine that the quarterback room just won't work with both Flacco and Watson sharing space in there, what if Watson gets hurt? Do they actually think this DTR kid is going to be able to accomplish what Flacco did? There's no way.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be realistic. There's no way. No way.
Yeah, and you know, I'd like to think that the Browns do know that. In the press conference, Andrew Berry mentioned that they've always looked at the backup quarterback position as a top 30 position. And we saw that, you know, dating back to as soon as Andrew Berry really got here. We had Case Keenum for a few years back up. He was one of the higher paid ones. Then you go to Brissett. And this year, obviously, we had Dobbs. That decision, whatever in hindsight you want to make of that is whatever. But you're right, Bruce. I don't think DTR is really going to be the answer next year for a legit backup. And we'll see. Maybe they'll dip back into the waters of a Jacoby Brissett. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but they're certainly going to need a plan because I agree with you, Bruce. I'm not sure you can rule out on DTR after what we saw last year.
I heard something interesting the other day down here in Florida. I didn't cross-check this, but I believe it, that in college football, there hasn't been a team win the national championship with a coach that is calling his own offensive plays in like 17 years.
Wow.
And it got me thinking, well, how about the pros? Well, who was the last pro team? So, you know, Ryan, make a note and see if you can find that out for us. The last pro team to have their coach calling the offensive plays to win it. I would imagine it's happened maybe a couple, 3 times since the 17-year drought in college. Now, one other final question about the Browns before we move on. I also heard a rumor down here, I don't know how valid it is, that the Browns are looking at Dorsey as a possible replacement as one of the offensive coaches, the former QB, and any other rumors about the tight end and running backs coach and these vacancies along with Van Pelt as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I'll start with the running back coach position because I think that one has a little less calamity to it. It's appearing that Deuce Vaughn, the old Carolina Panthers and Detroit Lions running back coach, is becoming that top candidate for the Browns. I'm not quite sure if they offered him yet, but I would expect this week, I wouldn't be shocked to see Deuce Vaughn accept that role with the Browns. I heard it was between him and the Jets, so not sure on that. In terms of the offensive coordinator position, we've interviewed 3 guys. Andy Dickerson, the offensive line coach from the Seahawks. As you mentioned, Ken Dorsey, our former friend and quarterback, and then Gerard Johnson, the Houston Texans quarterback coach. Those are the 3 that we've thus far interviewed, and Bruce, and it seems like the one with the most steam is Gerard Johnson. He's the youngest out of those 3. He played in the NFL. He was a quarterback, I believe, at Texas A&M. I don't believe he has any ties with Deshaun Watson particularly. However, Andrew Berry said in the press conference that that's not a huge factor. So it appears as though Gerard Johnson, out of those 3, is the most likely candidate to replace Alex Van Pelt as it stands right now.
How about tight end?
I have not heard much about I would be lying. I totally forgot. We actually hired Tommy Rees, Alabama's former offensive coordinator, as our tight ends coach. It was a bit of a shocking move, not necessarily in terms of he doesn't fit the mold, but I just kind of didn't know he was leaving Alabama. However, though, with Nick Saban, we know that once the head coach is gone, a lot of these other coaches seem to follow in the trail, same footsteps. So he is our new tight ends coach.
I see Callahan's kid.
Yes.
Got a job.
So, and that's leaving Browns fans in a bit of turmoil because if I'm a betting man, I'd brace myself to go see Bill follow his son Brian to the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah. Common sense prevails. Yeah. So that could become a vacancy not by the Browns' choice, that's for sure. Okay, let's dive into these playoffs, and we got a lot to cover here. Let me start with San Francisco's 24-21 victory over the Green Bay Packers. And prior to Saturday's game against Green Bay, the 49ers had been 0-31 in games under Kyle Shanahan in which they trailed by 5 points or more entering the fourth quarter. Now, the Niners were the only NFL team without a win in this category since 2017. And it almost didn't happen. It took a flawless, time-consuming drive that allowed them to finish the game with a go-ahead touchdown and earn San Francisco the right to play in their fourth NFC championship game in the last 5 years. Brock Purdy, the quarterback for San Francisco, was very erratic and inconsistent throughout this game. And Coach Shanahan made some questionable fourth down and red zone calls, too, in my opinion. Purdy was lucky that he didn't get picked on several of his throws, but that final drive was the kind of drive that can launch a team, lead to a championship. 69 yards, eating up 5 minutes, 11 seconds, no panic whatsoever. Christian McCaffrey taking it in for the winning score, and that left Green Bay only 1:07 left to come back. McCaffrey was his usual self, 98 yards rushing and 7 receptions for 30 yards. Purdy 6 of 7 for 47 yards on that final drive alone. And he made 2 big third down conversion throws to keep that drive going. What a shame, though, for the number 7 Packers, 7 seed Packers, because they really played a great game against the number 1 seed 49ers. They really did. Jordan Love, 21 of 34, 194 yards, 2 touchdowns. But he had 2 picks, including 1 on their final possession to seal their fate. I think that Green Bay fans can feel convinced that they have found their heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers. However, as I said on last week's show, Love came of age, in my opinion, on Thanksgiving Day in that game against Detroit. That game launched Green Bay to the great finishing act that they put forth to the season. And it's really quite a story that they streaked to a playoff berth and then humbled Dallas to advance to this game. The future's bright for Green Bay, especially because, remember, they're the youngest team in the National Football League. And by the way, Deebo Samuel hurt his shoulder on the Niners' opening drive and never returned. So his status is in question for this conference championship game, which we'll get to in a minute. And we'll also reference Mark Lawrence when he joins us in our second segment to handicap the games. But your comment on the Frisco win over Green Bay.
Well, I think it's a simple case of the better team at the end of the day prevailed. I mean, credit to Green Bay to go into the 49ers stadium and get on the board first, get a decent, commandable 6-point lead. But it just kind of faltered as expected. I mean, it's really tough to put that team, a young quarterback, and quite frankly, as you mentioned, an extremely young team, expect them to go on this 1.5-minute game-winning drive in a situation like the divisional playoff that they've never been to. It was simply too much to overcome. We saw that with Jordan Love throwing that pick at the end to end it. San Francisco is on to the next game, obviously one more away from the Super Bowl. Next steps for Green Bay, honestly, not much. Pay your quarterback, get another year under these guys' belts, add something in the draft, free agency. Future's bright for Green Bay.
Yeah. Baltimore 34, Houston 10. I didn't know what John Harbaugh said to his players in the locker room at halftime, but whatever it was, it worked. Because tied at 10 at the break, the Ravens came out and dominated, outscoring Houston 24-0. MVP candidate Lamar Jackson was unstoppable. He wound up 16 of 22 for 152 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And by the way, he ran for 100 yards. Oh, gosh. He scored 2 touchdowns. The star quarterback made history, becoming the first quarterback since 1948 in either the regular season or the playoffs with at least 2 touchdown passes, 2 touchdown runs, 100 yards rushing, and 100 passer rating in the same game. I mentioned Harbaugh, but Jackson himself said that he did most of the talking in the locker room at halftime, and he combined a lot of cursing, we understand. The Ravens will now host the AFC title game for the first time since 1971 when the Baltimore Colts beat Oakland. This will be the Ravens' 5th conference championship game since their arrival in Baltimore. Now, Baltimore fans are not forgetting that 4 years ago, the Ravens went 14-2 in the regular season and lost the first game in the playoffs to Tennessee. Houston is to be complimented for their surprisingly successful season. I don't know that any of my colleagues around the country picked them to win their division, number one, then annihilate the team with one of the best defenses in the league, namely our Cleveland Browns, and then do it with a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud. Isn't it ironic? Stroud went to Ohio State. The former Houston quarterback, Deshaun Watson, is now with us and was never able to come close to accomplishing what this former Buckeye did in Houston. Obviously, he was injured, but the Texans played a great first half. However, penalties really hurt them in this game, and the Ravens woke up and showed why they earned that first round bye. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. I came across this. Lamar Jackson faced a career-high blitz rate of 75%. He went 13 of 18 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns versus this blitz. Baltimore outrushed Houston 229 to 38 in this game. And Lamar Jackson was 1-3 in the postseason in his career. Now he has a chance to prove that he is indeed a championship quarterback.
Yeah, kind of similar to the 49ers. I think the Baltimore Ravens came out a little slow. I think you can attribute it to the 2-week bye for being the 1 seed. But I mean, in the second half, Lamar Jackson just proved why he's going to win his second MVP. You mentioned how dominant he was, but as equally dominant is the defense. You take away that punt return in the second quarter for the Houston Texans, and they only score 3 points. They don't put up a single offensive touchdown. It's going to be really hard for Mark to convince me the Chiefs over the Ravens. I don't know if that's where he's leaning, but if he is, it's going to take a lot of convincing because, gosh, that Baltimore team looks dominant, led by, of course, likely MVP Lamar Jackson. In terms for Houston, can't really be upset. You had a season nobody saw coming. You reached heights that you didn't think was possible yet. And now it looks as though you already have a top 5 quarterback potentially in the league in what's going to be a second-year C.J. Stroud and a second-year DeMeco Ryans. The future's really bright. You get Tank Dell back. Got to be a successful season for every Texans fan.
You know who was the MVP last year, don't you?
I do. The other guy he's going to be facing.
Be careful. Be careful. Detroit 31, Tampa Bay 23. Former Browns #1 draft pick quarterback Baker Mayfield and his Tampa Bay Bucks were very well prepared for this game. And in front of a hungry, starving, hostile crowd in the Motor City. The game was tied through 3 quarters, but the 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns for the Lions sealed off this great effort by Baker and his teammates. Even after falling behind 31-17, the Bucs didn't give up. Baker found Mike Evans with 4:37 to go for a touchdown that made the game a 1-possession affair. I didn't know if it was necessary for them to go for 2 at that point. They failed, of course. And indeed, they did get one last shot after their defense forced a punt on the Lions' next drive. However, Mayfield forced a pass, and Derek Barnes got the pick that ended Tampa Bay's hopes. Mayfield threw for 349 yards in this game and 3 touchdowns. And meanwhile, Detroit quarterback Jared Goff threw for 287 and 2 touchdowns. Detroit came out after halftime and scored touchdowns on 3 straight drives. Goff, who threw for only 99 yards in the first half, found that soft spot in the Tampa Bay defense in the second stanza and threw for 188 yards. And once Goff started connecting to St. Brown and Laporta, the Lions were able to run just enough to keep the Tampa Bay defense guessing. That Tampa Bay defense, by the way, I thought did a very good job in the first half, but they simply couldn't stop Detroit when it counted the most in the second stanza. This will be Detroit's first appearance in the NFC Championship game since 1991. And remember, the Lions, along with us, Jacksonville and Houston, are the only teams in the entire NFL to never even play in the Super Bowl, let alone win it. So this victory over Tampa Bay and their second playoff win this season, they had one playoff win, just one in their previous 65 seasons combined.
Yeah, credit to Baker Mayfield. He made it an otherwise pretty entertaining and competitive game in what I thought was a pretty lopsided matchup. I think the Detroit Lions pretty much superior in almost every spot in that lineup, and especially given that they're playing at Ford Field in front of those, as you described, very starving fans. We know something about that. But I think there's a real quarterback market out there for Baker. I think Tampa Bay is going to extend him. I think they should for 2-3 years. I'm not going to sit here and say a 4 or 5 year deal or anything like that, but I think he showed enough. He proved enough to get a middle class 2-3 year extension with the Buccaneers, and I would imagine that's what they're going to do. You flip it over for the Detroit Lions. I mean, they played a hell of a game as they have been all year. And now they have a totally different animal, as we've been describing the 49ers as that lately. They're going to have a very, very, very tough matchup. And as you know, Bruce, like you said all the time, that playoff experience deep goes so long, and they don't really have that like the 49ers do. So I expect it to 49ers to win, but I think it'll be a closer game than it seems, and we'll obviously get into that later.
Yeah, and I think that had Purdy not gotten hurt in the Philadelphia Conference Championship game a year ago, that San Francisco would have represented that conference and played against Kansas City for all the marbles. But it's going to be interesting to see how Detroit plays. Has there been any talk about in Cleveland? I'm sure there has been, about why did we get rid of Mayfield?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're going to have your Baker bros crawling out of the woodworks whenever Baker shows up. So that's just expected, but nobody cares. I'm happy for Baker, and you should be too. Get over it. Deshaun's our quarterback.
Yeah. All right, Kansas City 27, Buffalo 24. Patrick Mahomes did it again. He beat Josh Allen again in the playoffs. However, this time he did it on the road in Buffalo. Some things never changed, though, including passing for touchdowns to his favorite target, Travis Kelce. Kelce was on the receiving end 5 times for 75 yards and 2 TDs. And meanwhile, Isaiah Pacheco rushed for 97 yards and kept the Buffalo defense honest. This big win puts Kansas City into their 6th straight AFC championship game. This was Mahomes' first road playoff win, improving his postseason record to 13-3. Kansas City scored on 5 of their first 6 possessions. Buffalo had countered throughout the game in front of their home fans. The lead changed 5 times in this affair. Buffalo kicker Tyler Bass missed a potential game-time field goal of 44 yards with 1:47 left. And that will give him nightmares this whole upcoming off season. I'm sure the Buffalo fans will not let him forget about it. They're not going to be so forgiving, especially as starved as they are, having such a good team since Allen arrived and not being able to get to the Super Bowl. Here's one for you. The 2 touchdown passes from Mahomes to Kelce are the 15th and 16th times that the 2 players have combined for scores in the playoffs. They now have 1 more than Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski for the NFL record for most touchdowns by a quarterback receiving combo. This is yet another big disappointment for Josh Allen, who has been eliminated by Kansas City 38-24 at KC in 2020. 42-36 in overtime in 2021. Allen wound up 26 of 39 for 186 yards and a touchdown. He also rushed for 72 yards, but it wasn't enough. So it ends a great story for Buffalo this year, a 6-game winning streak that resulted in Buffalo's 4th consecutive AFC East title. So Kansas City moves on. By the way, Taylor Swift and Jason Kelce were cheering together through out the game in their suite. Kelce was shirtless. I don't understand why, but there was that too.
I truthfully don't have much to say about this game. I just feel for Bills fans. I mean, you'll be hearing wide right for years to come. I'm so sorry. That sucks. And it just sucks for me too, and a lot of Browns fans, because I think this is the worst possible matchup for an AFC championship that you could have asked for, it being the winner of the AFC North, not named the Browns, versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who are just nauseatingly good at football. I mean, to the fact that I have to watch Patrick Mahomes in his, 6th straight AFC Championship game appearance than he took over in Kansas City in 2018. I mean, it's mind-boggling. We've seen this dynasty develop in front of our eyes. And if Patrick Mahomes goes and win a Super Bowl this year, I mean, 3 Super Bowl rings, 2 MVPs in your, seventh, going into your 8th year in the league. I've never seen anything like it. I don't even know to root against it at this point. I'm like, do I get mad or do I just appreciate greatness? And it's a juggle I feel like many of us are having at this moment.
Mark Lawrence, editor-publisher of The Playbook, playbooksports.com, top handicapper in the country. He was 4 for 4 in the NFL playoff games last week. He's next on Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play.
Now here is the risk Brown had to take with
Great to have you back on Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network. Bruce Drennan, Ryan Smith joining us now, Mark Lawrence. But before we bring Mark in, Big Play Network presented by Tipco Sports. Tipco Sportsbook app has your traditional bets like the money line spread and point. But also lock in player props and check out the Big Play boosts every single week to back your favorite Cleveland teams and athletes with the best odds in the state of Ohio. Get in the action, load up for football season. A couple of important games this weekend, plus the big one, of course, coming up. Use the promo code BIGPLAY100 to get $100 of bets on us. Just bet $25 and we'll give you $100 bet credits. Bet with Big Play all season long with the Tipco sports book. Well, Mr. 1,000%, you hit them all last week, Mark.
Well, that was okay, Bruce. We'll see if we can keep the streak going this week. Knock on wood, we always take good things when they happen every week.
Mark, of course, editor-publisher of the Playbook, playbooksports.com. I want to ask you about these games. San Francisco's win over Green Bay. In the first segment here, Mark, chose to credit Green Bay a lot for their preparation. A number 7 seed. They're the youngest team in the NFL. Their future is bright. They obviously have found their heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers. And on the Frisco side, maybe this is the wake-up call that they needed. We'll get to Deebo Samuel's status when I have you handicap the game. But sometimes, as I pointed out, this kind of a wake-up call can launch a team to a championship. Your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, unquestionably, Bruce, you know the saying that when you win games that arguably you should not have, it almost always happens along the way en route to a championship. And I think that could well have been the case for San Francisco last week. Not to say that they didn't deserve the win, but it certainly was not a convincing win by any means.
Next, Baltimore's victory over Houston. And I thought Houston played a tremendous first half, very inspired for a team that had no playoff experience with a rookie quarterback. But I understand at halftime, Jackson went on a tirade using expletives every other word. And I don't know if he was inspiring his teammates or himself, because in the second half, he was unbelievable. And they showed why they were the number 1 seed in the AFC.
Yeah, he also showed why he's going to be the MVP in the league this year, Bruce. It was a really strong second half performance by Lamar Jackson. And he's sort of been zoned in on winning the Super Bowl this year. He did a lot of offseason work. It's showing out on his stats and the record. Everything is working good for him that way. And I can understand him blowing a gasket, if you will, at halftime, because they should not have even been close against Houston. And he made sure it ended up being just that way.
And boy, it was also a historic game because for those of you that are not aware, Mark has just joined us here on Bonus Time with Drennan a few weeks ago. And you may not be familiar with his tremendous work over the decades, but he doesn't like laying points, let alone as many points as Baltimore had to give Houston. And that was your most confident play last week.
Yeah, it was sort of that favorite that we just couldn't let go, that dog that was albeit ugly rather than a good-looking dog. And, you know, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, Bruce, especially when you get down to a menu that only has a few hors d'oeuvres on it, per se, if you will. And that was kind of a short appetizer card last week, getting ready for this week.
I think the future's bright for Houston, don't you? I mean, Stroud and company, that's a young team, especially in light that how many of us around the country that do what we do for a living, Mark, picked Houston to win this division, let alone demolish the Browns like they did in advance?
Well, there aren't too many people even in Houston that picked Houston to win that division, Bruce. It was a big surprise, and obviously the reason the catalyst was C.J. Stroud, the quarterback, who looks to be, I think, hands down the rookie of the year in the National Football League this year. What a terrific job he did. He's got so many traits about Joe Burrow in him. I don't know if it's the Ohio State blood that they once each had, but the bottom line is he's a quarterback, I think, right now that no team in the National Football League is looking forward to going up against.
And again, playing in that division, which has been kind of a topsy-turvy division, Tennessee surprisingly fired Vrabel, replaced him with Callahan's kid. So now we were questioning in the first segment whether the old man's going to join the kid in Tennessee. It would make sense, but we shall see. I know the Browns don't want to part company with him, but that division now can be, who knows, maybe Houston will become the dominant team in that division, although I'm sure Indianapolis, Tennessee, and so they're going to have something to say about it.
Well, my one concern about the domination factor, Bruce, is that number one, remember, Houston only won 3 games last year. And when you find a team that goes from 3 wins to a division championship, makes it into the playoffs, they oftentimes meet with a little bit lower level of success the following year. If for no other reason, teams get up for them more than perhaps they thought they needed to. And there's also a lot more game film on C.J. Stroud this year. So I wouldn't look for Houston to attain that same success last year, but I would also be not surprised if they make the playoffs as well.
Yeah, and it's so balanced because we forgot about mentioning Jacksonville, and obviously with Lawrence, I think they have to prove they can take it to the next level, but we shall see. Detroit's win over Tampa Bay. There's a lot of people in Cleveland, obviously. Why did we get rid of Baker Mayfield? I think they have found their heir apparent to Tom Brady, Mark. A tremendously prepared Tampa Bay team. But Detroit showed their stuff too. Goff and company. I like the fire this Coach Campbell displays. And who knows, maybe this is going to be a historic year for Detroit because, as you well know, they've had as long, if not a longer drought than our Cleveland Browns. Longer when you go back before the Super Bowl, 1964, of course, the Browns won it all. But my goodness, it's an interesting story for Detroit and Tampa Bay too.
Unquestionably, Tampa Bay showed a nice hand thus far this football season here. It may well have saved Todd Bowles' job. I think anything less than the playoffs, he would have been gone. Although the questionable call that he made in the end of the football game still remains up for debate. But the bottom line is Tampa made the playoffs. Baker Mayfield, I think, earned himself a real strong contract extension, deservedly so, for the job he did this year. And you have to tip your hand to Jared Goff at Detroit, the quarterback here. What a nice job he's done. So under the radar type, he's a workman. Everything that he does is really, really, I think it surprises a lot of people, and perhaps it shouldn't here. I was reading somewhere, and we put this in our newsletter here this week. He's just the 3rd quarterback in National Football League history that has led multiple teams to 14 wins in a single season. He did it with the Rams and he did it with Detroit. You don't find too many quarterbacks doing just that. The only other 2 guys, Bruce, by the way, that did it were, how about Tom Brady and Peyton Manning?
Kansas City's win over Buffalo was a classic, great game. But Kansas City's got Buffalo's number. It's amazing. Buffalo can beat Kansas City during the regular season, but they just can't pull it off in the postseason. And this year, even especially because it was at Buffalo, I knew the weather wasn't going to bother Kansas City because their weather conditions the week before were even worse than what it was in Buffalo. But Mahomes and company, I totally agreed with your pick of Kansas City. They're the defending champions until you dethrone them, which is why I'm going to be curious what your pick is going to be in the upcoming game against Baltimore. But you got to give Mahomes and Kelsey credit. I just laid a stat out there that indeed 16th and 17th time, or 15th and 16th time they've combined for scores. That exceeds and is an NFL record over Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. What a combination they are. And this was truly a great game, but boy, is Bass going to have nightmares throughout the entire offseason?
Well, Buffalo is going to have a hard time sleeping in the offseason. So will the Bills Mafia. after what happened. Another wide right affair for them. Unfortunately, it all fell to Tyler Bass on his shoulders. It shouldn't have come down to that. It wasn't all meant to be on his shoulders. And Bruce, if he kicks the field goal, they don't win the game. They only go to overtime. They still would have had to do the job and get the job done in overtime. But the bottom line to me is I think the better football team did win the game. And I think the better quarterback emerged in the football game in Patrick Mahomes. What's interesting this week when they take on Baltimore, Patrick Mahomes, he's had a startling record, unbelievably good record against Baltimore in his NFL career. He's made 4 starts. He's 3-1. But if you take a look at his QB rating, it's 122.1. That's like through the roof. Patrick Mahomes has been through Baltimore, so it's going to set the stage up. We'll talk about that game in just a bit.
Mark Lawrence is the editor-publisher of the Playbook, playbooksports.com. Check it all out. Let's now look at the 2 championship games. First, the conference championship in the NFC has Detroit visiting San Francisco. The Niners are a 7-point favorite. They are 18-1 when Purdy, Kaepernick, and Deebo Samuel play a whole game together. But when they don't, they're only 2-4. They're 8-9 when Deebo doesn't play since 2019. And Detroit, on the other hand, hasn't had a win on the road in the playoffs since 1957. They average 30 points a game at home, but only 24 on the road. The Niners are getting 7 points. How do you see the NFC Championship?
Well, 1957, Bruce, my first guess, that was probably Bobby Lane quarterbacking that football team back in the day. That's Jared Goff here doing it this season here. The way I see this game coming down here is presuming, that's a big presumption, that Deebo Samuel plays in this football game. I think San Francisco is going to be very, very difficult to beat. Again, like we just opened up the show with, perhaps they won a game that maybe they shouldn't have. It gives them a free pass. They're playing with house money in this football game. But you've got some really, really powerful San Francisco numbers in here. You look at them from game 10 on out, the last 3 seasons, this football team is 24-6 straight up, and 21-9 against the spread. This is their time of the year for San Francisco. They play some really, really good football here. And I'm also looking at the fact that they are a number 1 seed. Number 1 seeds generally do well in championship rounds. They're 36-12 straight up. Whether or not that'll hold true for Baltimore, we'll get to that in just a moment here. But I like the makeup of the San Francisco football team. And again, playing with house money, I think they'll get past Detroit, a football team that right now climbed the mountain. They're feeling as good as they can. They go home without going to the Super Bowl. They'll still feel like, hey, man, we did a really good thing this football season. We made it to the championship game. But I don't believe they're going to go any further.
So you are laying the points in this
Yes,
one like you did with Baltimore last week.
Yeah, this will be my Baltimore play of this week. The one favorite that I would get back behind here in San Francisco. And there's a Kyle Shanahan factor here. He can be a little bit conservative, but what he does is game plan always tends to win out, Bruce. There's a reason that his football teams lead the league in rush attempts per game. It's because he controls the ball, he controls the clock, and it opens up the passing game for him. And it serves real well for Brock Purdy here. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see in this football game is San Francisco running the ball down Detroit's throat in this football contest and doing just that.
And the other thing, too, is a lot of us feel that had Purdy not gotten hurt in the game against Philadelphia in this same scenario last year, that they would have represented the NFC in the Super Bowl against Kansas City. And that brings us to Kansas City, visiting Baltimore with the Ravens, a 3.5-point choice. You had mentioned that Baltimore is the number 1 seed. You laid a very interesting tidbit on us, but then again, we come back to that prevailing feeling that Kansas City's the defending Super Bowl champions. Been there, done that. Mahomes, 1 year removed from being the MVP, even though Jackson's going to win it this year. How do you see the AFC Championship game, Mark Lawrence?
Well, this will be Patrick Mahomes' 17th playoff game, Bruce. And if you take a look at the other quarterbacks that are alive in the playoff championship round this week, I'm talking Jared Goff, Lamar Jackson, and Brock Purdy. You add up all their playoff games, they total 17 combined. A lot of experience here for Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City football team here. And you've still got the chip on the shoulder, the monkey on their back for Baltimore here. And hasn't done it. They've been good. They look good, but they just don't ever quite seem to get the job done. And you're knocking off San Francisco here. You're asking a whole lot here, Bruce. We talked last week about how good Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes is when you give him points as an underdog. My goodness, he's 12-1 against the spread. The 13 times he's taken points. He's won 9 of those games straight up on the playing field. And then you have Andy Reid, all about his experience factor in the playoffs as well. Now, I'm not saying we're going to put him on a scale and say he's much, much better than John Harbaugh. Harbaugh does a great job with Baltimore. But when it comes to playoff experience and getting the job done, it's all Andy Reid here. I think Kansas City's the better team in this football game. I'll play them in the upset. And here's an interesting stat, Bruce. I don't know if you're aware of, but when you have a conference title game like we do in this particular matchup, and it's pairing up the top 2 scoring defenses in the league, the winner of a game like this has gone on to win 5 out of 5 Super Bowls. So what we're saying here is the winner of this football game is going to be moving on toward unprecedented history of perhaps winning the Super Bowl again this year.
Wow. And if it is Kansas City, that would be a rematch of a few years ago when they did defeat the San Francisco 49ers. All right, Mark, before I let you go, I want to ask you about some of the college transfer portals that we are experiencing. On a negative note, because of NIL, this JT Daniels, USC, Georgia, West Virginia, Rice, there's a perfect example. This is becoming so bizarre. I don't know what they're going to do, what they can do, but
They have to do something, Bruce. This is getting, it's the wild, wild west out there with no law or order that's going on in the world of college football. That's why Nick Saban left Alabama. He's tired of it. He doesn't want to have to go up against all this horseshit and BS and all this stuff that's going on here. Something has to be done here real soon. And I think the NCAA has to step up, show some cojones, and make some laws that or enact penalties and so forth and whatnot that get this order back in shape for college football here. It's a dizzying thing. Every time I read the paper, I'm reading about another quarterback that's entering the transfer portal. He doesn't know whether he's going to go or not, but he's in there, he's sitting in there, and then the buzz begins. Now, what he's doing, Bruce, is fielding all the offers. That may the best man win the biggest cash offer that he'll take, and then he'll decide where he's going to go. That's not college athletics, Bruce. That's underhandedness in college athletics to the max.
Yeah.
It's NFL football. Free agency is what it is, and I'm really sick and tired of it.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but maybe one of the biggest examples of it is what our Ohio State Buckeyes have done. Alabama quarterback Julian Sayin, Alabama safety Caleb Downs, Ole Miss running back Quishon Judkins, and Kansas State quarterback Will Howard. The alums at Columbus are really dishing out the cash, and so is C.J. Stroud. Did you see C.J. Stroud has contributed with at least $100,000? I don't know if that's an accurate figure or more. I know that's the least amount that he gave to his former school.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Now they're backing, the players are backing the school in the form of boosters doing just this. To me, it's just absolutely mind-boggling. And, what happened to recruiting, the good old days of recruiting? That's why Alabama excelled. It's why Georgia excels. It's why Clemson doesn't go into the portal. They just don't believe in it. They don't want to get into all the rhetoric. Neither does Georgia. And Georgia wins despite the fact that they're not being enticed into the transfer portal here. So hats off, go Georgia Bulldogs. Stay your stance. I love exactly what Kirby Smart is doing there.
One and only Mark Lawrence, editor, publisher of the Playbook, playbooksports.com. Now, we will not have Mark on the show next week because we're in that interim of the 2-week lapse between the conference championships and the Super Bowl. But 2 weeks from today, Mark, we will have you on the show to recap these 2 championship games coming up. And of course, the big one, the Super Bowl, which will be 2 weeks from this coming Sunday. Thank you as always, Mark. Talk to you then.
And my pleasure as always, Bruce. Be well, stay safe, and enjoy the games.
All right, the one and only Mark Lawrence. We'll continue with bonus time with Drennan in just a minute, and we'll wrap things up here on the Big Play Sports Network.
Now here is the risk that Brown had to take with
Bruce Drennan back with you. Bonus time with Drennan. Ryan Smith with me, Big Play Sports Network. And Ryan, interesting picks again. Lawrence is scorching hot right now. He picked all 4 games correctly last week. And he likes the favorite, the number 1 seed, San Francisco, minus the points. Again, that's unusual for him to lay that many points, but he was very confident with Baltimore laying the points last week. It easily covered when all was said and done. Same thing he feels this week with San Francisco.
Yeah, two big takeaways from me from that segment with Mark. One, not a fan of the transfer portal. And then also, he's not betting against Patrick Mahomes, which I'm a little disappointed about, of course, because my initial gut feeling is the Ravens, but he called the Chiefs last week, and I have the utmost respect for his knowledge and picks and what he does. So now I'm even more conflicted than ever.
Yeah, I like Kansas City too. As you've heard me say numerous times, until you dethrone the champions, I just can't go against them. Weather won't be a factor for Kansas City. Again, they've played in the most horrid conditions. So, and I don't even know what the forecast is for Baltimore, Maryland, come Sunday. But I like Kansas City as well. That's actually the first game. And then Detroit and San Francisco. Are you giving the Lions a chance?
You know, Bruce, I actually am. I still like San Fran to win, but I would not be shocked to see this a close game like the Packers one was, or even closer. If I'm betting the spread, if I'm a spread better this weekend, I'm 100% on the Lions with that -7. I know Mark said he loved it, and he certainly knows more than I do about this stuff. So, you know, take his word over mine, obviously, if that's what you want to do. But I do really like the Lions. I mean, they're fighting for so much. Like, it's easy to say if they lose this game, they've already had such a successful season, and that remains true. But I just got to see this game through. I think Jared Goff is playing outstanding. I mean, Dan Campbell's name is getting thrown up there now with some of the best. Obviously, he needs to prove that through his tenure with the Lions, a few more years, of course. And San Francisco is, I think, the most complete team. But I'm giving the Lions a chance here, Bruce, and I wouldn't be shocked to see this be a 1, 2, 3-point game.
Well, I think we all should be cautious and check the status of Deebo Samuel, because I laid that stat on you a little earlier in the segment before we brought in Mark Lawrence on how successful. I mean, again, to reiterate, the San Francisco 49ers are 18-1 when Brock Purdy, Cafferty, and Deebo Samuel play a whole game together. But they are 2-4 in other such games, and they're 8-9 when Deebo doesn't play, which goes back to 2019. So just because check that injury status.
Yeah, Bruce, I think it's right now like listed a 50-50 or something, but I mean, you can't understate how much of blow that is for the 49ers. I mean, he did a little bit of everything over there in San Francisco, but good thing for them, they still have Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle, so they should be able to get along just fine. But I mean, that's one less guy Detroit has to worry about, and that gives them obviously a little bit more of a chance to win this game.
Yeah, and I thought Lawrence gave us a real interesting tidbit too on the way that Shanahan calls games, and it fits Brock Purdy's athletic limitations. So, indeed, that's to be considered as well. Well, let's switch to the Cavaliers real quickly before we close out this version of Bonus Time with Drennan. Again, as I said last week, I predicted at the beginning of the season that the Cavaliers would be the 4th seed in the East. That's exactly where they stand right now. I did give the Cavaliers a chance of elevating themselves to the number 3 seed. But then again, who could foresee that we would lose 2 of our big 4 in Garland and Mobley? And my goodness, I cannot believe what this team is achieving without these 2 guys. It is really commendable that they're playing this caliber of ball.
Yeah, Bruce, I mean, you mentioned on last week's show that JB Bickerstaff at the very least has to be considered amongst the names for the recipients of the Coach of the Year award. And a week since then, I mean, that case has only obviously gotten stronger. Riding as we're taping this right now, riding, an 8-game win streak, the longest in the NBA, I might add. And it's just been outstanding. You look at the East. I mean, the top 3 teams there kind of separate themselves between the Celtics, Bucks, and 76ers. And like you said, you predicted them to be in the 4th seed, which is exactly where they're sitting right now. And I think within that second tier of the Eastern Conference with the likes of the Cavs, the Knicks, the Heat, the Pacers, the Cavs are leading that tier. And that's been nothing short of outstanding, given that you lose Darius Garland, you lose Evan Mobley. Jared Allen steps up and has been stepping up in a huge way, playing his best ball, quite frankly, in his tenure with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Donovan Mitchell, Mr. Consistent. He's good for 25, 30 a night. And then Sam Merrill out of the woodwork, out of nowhere, has been draining threes like he's been doing it his whole career. He's been one of the hottest, most fascinating players in the league in this stretch run for the Cavaliers. And they've been putting themselves in an amazing position once Darius and Evan Mobley returns. Now the question is, how do they assimilate them back into this core group the way you've been playing? That's up for JB Bickerstaff to figure that out.
What is the injury status of those two? I know originally we were talking 6 to 8 weeks. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, so Darius Garland a week ago or so got that wire removed from his jaw, so he's actually looking to come back at the end of January. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the date they targeted was January 29th. It might be a little bit later than that. But, in regards to Darius Garland, that jaw injury, it's not going to take him too long to get back up to speed, given that he wasn't too limited in what he could do outside of, playing an actual game or anything like that. But then you flip it over for Mobley. It's going to be more likely a few weeks after we see Darius return that Evan joins him, given that it was a knee surgery. Can't do too much. Don't want to force anything in that region. But it's looking good, and they've been able to stand their ground without two of their three best players.
Yeah, really be complimented. How about Embiid scoring 70 points?
And then literally 2 hours later, Karl Anthony Towns drops a 62 ball. I mean, it was a crazy night in the NBA. Joel Embiid, I think, is a clear favorite to go ahead and win back-to-back MVPs. And I don't know if you caught the end of that Timberwolves game, Bruce, or the post presser. Their coach was actually going in on Karl Anthony Towns because he was clearly at the end there. Like the first half, he was very efficient and he was having a really good game en route to that 40+ point half. But there at the end, I don't know if he got tired or what, but he was clearly just throwing up shots at the hindrance of his team because he was chasing that big number. And their coach didn't like it. And I thought for him to go in that presser and kind of go after him was quite a telling sign.
Yeah. It's a team game. The fact that we have not seen since the Ohtani Yamamoto signings in baseball, we touch upon this, it seems like every week. I cannot believe that there has been such inactivity by major league teams, not just the Guardians, but by major league teams in free agent signings and hardly any trades. I see Aroldis Chapman's going to the Pirates, but I mean, come on, I can't. Spring trade, the baseball publications, the fantasy baseball books and the baseball prognosticating rosters, how can they be printed? They're on the shelves. I see them in the drugstore. They're totally inaccurate because these rosters are not complete with all these players still out there.
Bruce, I'd be remiss if I didn't get your opinion on this. I don't know if you saw this morning, but they announced the next class of the Hall of Fame for baseball.
Yes, I did see that.
I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Obviously, Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, and Joe Mauer. Just your thoughts on that, because you know better than anyone.
Well, I certainly agree with Beltre. I think that he was a tremendous clutch hitter, very, very dangerous bat. He has the statistics to back him up. But again, the biggest thing, it was always good defensively too at third base.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, what always impressed me the most was how good Beltre was with ducks on the pond. Just a tremendous clutch hitter. As far as besides Helton, who was the other one? Oh, Mauer.
Yeah.
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a no-brainer. Mauer will go down as one of the greatest hitting catchers in the history of the game. Now, he transitioned to first base at the end of his career with Minnesota, but he will go down as one of the greatest hitting catchers. I mean, winning batting titles for a catcher, that's unheard of. You can go back to the Yogi Berra days when Berra won 3 MVPs back in the 50s. But the batting title?
Yeah.
Mauer was in contention for the batting title every single year. He wasn't a home run hitter, but and catchers traditionally are home run hitters if they are good hitters. Look at Johnny Bench, look at Yogi Berra, even Ivan Rodriguez, Mike Piazza. Piazza probably was the closest to Mauer as far as maintaining a high batting average throughout his career. but to me, it was a no-brainer that Mauer made it as well. One of the greatest Minnesota Twins ever in franchise history. The one that's tainted to me is health. Because he played in that altitude in Denver, which really, really benefited him. He was a consistent batting average hitter. He always had a tremendous batting average year in and year out. I can't take that away from him. 300 plus, it seemed, every single year. But if there was any second guessing of the three, he would be the only one, in my opinion, Ryan.
Okay, and then Bruce, before we wrap up the baseball talk and ultimately the show, I would love to know what you think, because I'm not too keen, on what exactly qualifies for the Baseball Hall of Fame. If I'm not mistaken, I think it seems to be a little more hard than, say, the NBA or something like that to get in. In your opinion, how far do you think Jose Ramirez is from being a real legit voted on option for the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think if he can continue putting up the numbers that he is putting up, it's a no-brainer.
Okay, wow.
But because you cannot ignore his statistics. But will the writers ignore his statistics? It's a very real possibility. I mean, when you look at now, we have to differentiate from the steroid era to the clean players. Was Albert Bell on steroids? We know Barry Bonds, despite his denial, Rafael Palmeiro, McGuire, Canseco, that whole crew. But indeed, I'll give you one. Albert Bell put up now his career was shortened, but he put up during his tenure with us and the White Sox, and he put up tremendous offensive numbers, not just power numbers, but batting average too. And one of the most dangerous hitters to step into the plate. He was one of the few guys historically that the opposing pitchers did not want to let beat him. And he was just incredibly intimidating. And even though it was a shorter period of time during his career, what I thought was unfair for not getting into the Hall of Fame. Again, there's the possibility of steroids, I clarify. But Sandy Koufax had a career shortened because of arthritis in his throwing. But in the duration of years that he was healthy before he was forced to retire because of that injury, he put up undeniable numbers. That's how I talk about Albert Bell. And I cannot believe that he was ignored. So to get back to Jose's being underappreciated while he's still playing for the Guardians here in the major leagues. That's a concern, but his numbers are so consistent and so overwhelming year after year after year. So if he does keep this up, I just can't conceive that they can ignore him. With that being said, it's time to wrap things up on our show because we are out of time for Bonus Time with Drennan here on the Big Play Sports Network, and we will be with you next week. We have a guest next week, Lamont Robinson, who is the CEO, Ryan, as you know, of the new American Basketball Hall of Fame, and what a list it is. And I'm going to be picking his brain, and through Lamont, we're going to be lining up some interviews because football season's winding down. So what I intend on doing here with Bonus Time with Drennan, with Ryan's assistance, is lining up a bunch of prestigious guests for interviews. And we're going to start next week with Lamont, tell you all about the American Basketball Hall of Fame. And I know that you were very receptive to this when I threw it out at you.
Yeah, I mean, not to give any spoilers away, and obviously nothing's confirmed. Don't want to, put a facade on for the viewers or anything. But in the voicemail you left me, my ears immediately perked up, of course, because you mentioned Bob Huggins, and me, of course. I went to the University of Cincinnati, so it's got some ties there. So I'm very excited to hear from Lamont and the guests that whoever it may be that we have on in the future.
Yeah, Lamont is connected as well as anybody with college and pro basketball, as anybody in the country. So he will be joining us next week. We'll recap, of course, the conference championships as we always do, feature Lamont, and maybe we'll have some news about baseball with spring training ready to open up for pitchers and catchers. Again, on behalf of Ryan Smith, I'm Bruce Drennan. You have a wonderful week. Enjoy those championship games. And until next week here on the Big Play Sports Network, remember, most importantly, I love you, Ohio.